The moment Willow Davies stepped into the Grand Metropolitan Convention Center, she knew this day would change everything, though not in the way she imagined. The annual Global Architecture Innovation Awards represented the pinnacle of achievement in her field, and her sustainable housing design for low-income communities had somehow beaten thousands of submissions to reach the final round. At 26, she was the youngest finalist in the award's 50-year history. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the portfolio bag on her shoulder, grateful she'd chosen her navy blazer and cream blouse over something more casual. The convention center buzzed with architects, engineers, and industry leaders from around the world. Willow Davies, a woman with a clipboard, approached, her smile professional but warm. "You're in presentation room C. You'll be going second, right after Theodore Foster." The name meant nothing to Willow at first. She nodded, following the coordinator down a marble hallway lined with architectural photography. But as they turned the corner, she caught snippets of conversation from a cluster of well-dressed attendees. "Foster's practically guaranteed to win. His firm has revolutionized commercial architecture in the last 5 years. 32 years old and already worth billions. The man's a legend." Willow's stomach dropped. She'd been so focused on perfecting her presentation that she hadn't researched her competition. Now she was apparently up against some architectural prodigy billionaire. Perfect. The presentation room held about 200 seats, already half filled with judges, journalists, and industry professionals. A massive screen dominated the front wall. Willow found a seat in the front row, setting her bag down carefully. Her design meant everything to her. 3 years of work, countless sleepless nights, and every ounce of passion she possessed poured into creating affordable, beautiful, sustainable housing that could actually be built at scale. "Ladies and gentlemen, our first finalist, Theodore Foster of Foster Architectural Group." Willow looked up, and her breath caught. The man who walked onto the stage moved with quiet confidence, tall and broad-shouldered in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His dark hair was styled with just enough casualness to seem effortless, and when he turned to face the audience, she noticed the sharp line of his jaw and intense hazel eyes that seemed to assess everything in seconds. He was handsome in that annoyingly effortless way some men possessed, the kind that made you forget what you were thinking about. Then he started speaking, and Willow forgot to be attracted to him. "The Future Towers project represents a new paradigm in luxury commercial real estate," Theodore began, his voice deep and assured. 50-story mixed-use buildings that combine office space, high-end retail, and premium residential units. Each tower incorporates smart technology, solar integration, and water reclamation systems. The images that filled the screen were undeniably stunning. Glass and steel structures that caught light like sculptures, interiors that looked like art museums, rooftop gardens that seemed to float in the sky. But as Theodore continued his presentation, Willow felt her initial awe curdle into something else. With projected costs of $800 million per tower and target demographics in the top 5% of earners, future towers will redefine urban living for those who demand the absolute best. The absolute best for the top 5%. Willow's hands clenched in her lap. His buildings were gorgeous, certainly, but they were monuments to wealth and exclusivity. Meanwhile, millions of people struggled to find safe, decent housing they could actually afford. When Theodore finished to enthusiastic applause, Willow stood on legs that felt steadier than before. She had fire in her veins now, purpose driving out nervousness. "Thank you for that presentation, Mr. Foster," the moderator said. "And now, our second finalist, Willow Davies, independent architect." She heard the difference in the introduction, He got his company name and implicit credentials. She got independent, which was a polite way of saying she worked out of her cramped apartment with more ambition than resources. Willow connected her laptop to the system with steady hands. When her first slide appeared a photo of the Riverside neighborhood where she'd grown up, she began. I designed the Harmony Commons project because I know what it's like to live in housing that barely qualifies as habitable. I grew up in buildings with broken heating, mold in the walls, and landlords who saw tenants as income sources rather than human beings. Her voice carried clearly through the room, years of presenting to skeptical investors giving her strength. Harmony Commons proposes a modular, scalable approach to affordable housing that doesn't sacrifice beauty, dignity, or sustainability. Using prefabricated elements and innovative materials, we can build quality homes for low and moderate income families at a cost of $150,000 per unit. She walked the audience through her design's bright, airy spaces with efficient layouts, shared green spaces that fostered community, solar panels and rainwater collection that reduced utility costs for residents already stretched thin. She showed her calculations, her partnerships with manufacturers, her pilot program approval in 3 cities. Architecture shouldn't just serve the wealthy, Willow concluded, looking directly at the judges. It should serve everyone. We have the ability to create beautiful, sustainable housing that people can actually afford. The only question is whether we have the will. The applause was warm but noticeably more subdued than what Theodore had received. Willow gathered her materials, telling herself she'd done her best. That was what mattered. Miss Davies. She turned to find Theodore Foster standing right behind her, and up close he was even more imposing. He had at least 6 inches on her 5'6" frame, and his presence seemed to fill the space around him. But it was his expression that caught her off guard, sharp, analytical, with a hint of something that might have been curiosity. "That was an interesting presentation," he said, his tone giving nothing away. "Interesting," Willow repeated, bristling. "Is that billionaire speak for quaint?" One of his dark eyebrows rose slightly. "I meant it as a compliment. The way you compliment something interesting you find at a yard sale, maybe." Willow knew she should probably be more diplomatic, but something about his presence, his easy confidence, his probably never worried about rent in his life, aura made her defenses slam into place. "Your towers are beautiful, Mr. Foster. But they're also completely irrelevant to 95% of the population." Irrelevant? Now there was definitely something in his voice, surprise, maybe irritation. "My buildings employ thousands of people, drive economic development, and push the boundaries of sustainable design. For people who can afford $8,000 a month apartments, very inspiring." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "And your project, while admirable in intention, relies on funding sources that don't exist and manufacturing partnerships that haven't been proven at scale. It's a nice dream, Miss Davies, but the real world requires real economics." The words stung because they hit close to her deepest fears that she'd never get the funding, never prove her concept, never move beyond being the scrappy idealist no one took seriously. "At least I'm trying to make the world better instead of just making myself richer," she shot back. Theodore's eyes flashed. "You don't know anything about me. I know your buildings cost $800 million and house the top 5%. That tells me everything I need to know." For a long moment, they stared at each other, the air between them crackling with tension. Then Theodore gave her a curt nod. "Good luck with the judging, Miss Davies." He walked away, and Willow stood there feeling simultaneously vindicated and weirdly hollow. She'd probably just burned any bridge that might have existed with one of the most successful architects in the world, but she'd meant what she said. Hadn't she? The award ceremony took place that evening in the convention center's grand ballroom. Willow had splurged on a dress for the occasion, deep emerald green that brought out the auburn highlights in her brown hair, with a fitted bodice and flowing skirt that made her feel elegant even in a room full of designer gowns. She'd done her makeup carefully, adding a confidence to her features that she didn't quite feel internally. She spotted Theodore across the room almost immediately. He changed into a tuxedo that fit him like it had been created specifically for his body, which it probably had. He was surrounded by people, all vying for his attention, but his gaze swept the room with that same analytical quality she'd noticed before. When his eyes landed on her, something flickered in his expression. Then someone said something to him, and he looked away. Willow found her assigned table, relieved to see some friendly faces from the sustainable architecture community. They talked shop while dinner was served, but her attention kept drifting. She tried to tell herself she was just nervous about the award announcement, not that she was hyper-aware of exactly where Theodore Foster sat 3 tables away. The competition for Innovation Award has always celebrated bold vision, the presenter announced after dinner. This year, both our finalists represent extraordinary approaches to the future of architecture. The judges were deeply impressed by both presentations. Willow's heart hammered. Next to her, her friend Marcus squeezed her hand encouragingly. However, after much deliberation, the judges have chosen to award this year's Global Architecture Innovation Award to Theodore Foster for the Future Towers project. The ballroom erupted in applause. Willow clapped too, mechanically, a smile fixed on her face even as disappointment crashed through her. She'd known it was a long shot. She'd known he was the favorite, but some part of her had hoped that maybe, just maybe, someone would see the value in what she was trying to do. Theodore made his way to the stage, shaking hands along the way. His acceptance speech was gracious and articulate, thanking his team and talking about the importance of pushing architectural boundaries. Willow barely heard it. She was already planning her exit, wondering how quickly she could leave without seeming like a sore loser. "I'd also like to acknowledge my fellow finalist," Theodore said, and suddenly Willow's attention snapped back to the stage. He was looking directly at her. Willow Davies presented a project that challenges all of us to think about who we're building for and why. That's a conversation this industry needs to have. The applause was generous, but Willow felt her cheeks burn. She didn't want his acknowledgement, his polite nod to the scrappy underdog. She wanted her work to be taken seriously. As soon as the ceremony ended, Willow headed for the exit. She made it as far as the lobby before a voice stopped her. Running away. She turned to find Theodore leaning against a marble column, his bow tie loosened and his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned. He held the award trophy in one hand, casual as if it were a coffee cup. "Congratulations on your win," Willow said stiffly. "I'm sure your future towers will be very impressive to the people who can afford them. You really don't let up, do you?" He pushed off the column, walking toward her. "What is it about me that bothers you so much? Besides the fact that you represent everything wrong with modern architecture, that we've turned building design into a luxury good instead of a human right. That's what you think I represent. Am I wrong?" Willow challenged. "When was the last time you designed something for someone who makes less than 6 figures? Theodore's expression shifted, something darker moving through it. "You don't know anything about where I came from or why I do what I do. Then enlighten me." For a moment she thought he might actually tell her. His jaw worked like he was wrestling with words. Then he shook his head. "Why? You've already decided who I am." He walked past her toward the exit, and Willow stood there feeling like she'd somehow lost a contest she hadn't known she was in. Over the next few weeks, Willow tried to move on. The publicity from being a finalist had brought some new interest in her project, including a potential investor meeting in New York. She threw herself into preparation, determined to prove that affordable housing could be both economically viable and architecturally excellent. The investor meeting was scheduled at a midtown Manhattan office building, all glass and steel and impersonal elegance. Willow arrived 15 minutes early, her portfolio perfected, her pitch rehearsed. The receptionist directed her to a conference room on the 45th floor. She was reviewing her notes when the door opened. She looked up with a professional smile that froze on her face. Theodore Foster stood in the doorway, looking as shocked as she felt. "What are you doing here?" they said simultaneously. Willow found her voice first. "I have a meeting with the Foster Development Group about funding for Harmony Commons." "Foster Development Group," Theodore repeated slowly. "My company's investment arm." The realization hit Willow like cold water. She'd been so focused on the foundation's name that she hadn't connected it to him. "You're my investor meeting, apparently." Theodore stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. He ditched the tuxedo for dark slacks and a white button-down with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, revealing muscular forearms that Willow absolutely did not notice. "My investment team flagged your project as worth a second look." "But you don't think it's viable," Willow said, her earlier disappointment hardening into resignation. "You said so at the convention." Theodore was quiet for a moment, studying her with that intense gaze. Then he moved to the conference table, setting down the folder he carried. "Sit down, Miss Davies. If you're just going to reject the proposal, I'd rather not waste either of our time. Sit down." The command in his voice was unmistakable, and despite herself, Willow found herself taking a seat. Theodore sat across from her, opening the folder to reveal her entire proposal, marked up with notes in a bold handwriting. "I've spent the last 3 weeks analyzing your project. The concept is sound. Your design is excellent. The cost projections are optimistic but not impossible." Willow blinked. "Then why did you say it wasn't viable?" "I said it relied on funding sources that don't exist. I didn't say it couldn't work." Theodore pulled out a spreadsheet covered in numbers. "The Foster Development Group has a social impact fund specifically for projects like this. We could provide the initial capital for a pilot program, let's say 50 units in one city. If the model works, we scale from there." Hope rose in Willow's chest, immediately followed by suspicion. "Why would you do this?" Theodore leaned back in his chair, something complicated crossing his face. "You asked when I last designed something for people who make less than 6 figures. The answer is never, but not because I don't think it matters." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I grew up in subsidized housing in Detroit. My mom worked 3 jobs to keep us fed. I know exactly what it's like to live in a place where the pipes freeze in winter and the landlord doesn't care if you have hot water." Willow felt her entire perception shift. "But you're a billionaire. Now, I wasn't always." His eyes met hers. "I built my company on high-end projects because that's where the money is, and money meant security. It meant never being that scared kid again. But you were right about something. I've spent so much time building for the wealthy that I forgot why I became an architect in the first place." The confession hung in the air between them. Willow found herself seeing Theodore completely differently, not as the entitled billionaire she'd imagined, but as someone who'd fought his way up from circumstances like her own. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I made assumptions about you." "You weren't entirely wrong. I have lost sight of things." Theodore tapped the proposal. "But this reminded me, so let's talk about how to make it happen." They spent the next 4 hours going over every detail of the project. Theodore's mind was sharp and quick, catching potential problems Willow had missed, suggesting solutions she hadn't considered. He challenged her ideas, but in a way that made them stronger, and when she pushed back, he listened. Really listened. "We should get dinner," Theodore said eventually, glancing at his watch. "It's nearly 8. Willow realized with a start that she'd completely lost track of time. "I should get back to my hotel." "Have you eaten?" Her stomach growled in response, betraying her. Theodore's mouth curved in something that might have been a smile. "Come on. I know a place." The place turned out to be a small Italian restaurant in Greenwich Village, the kind of neighborhood spot with red checked tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. Completely unpretentious and utterly charming, they were seated at a corner table, and Theodore ordered in what sounded like fluent Italian. "You speak Italian?" Willow asked. "I spent 2 years in Rome studying Renaissance architecture." The language stuck. He poured them both wine from the bottle the waiter had brought. "Tell me about growing up in Riverside." So she did. Willow found herself talking about her childhood, her single father who'd worked construction, the apartment with the perpetually broken heater, the way she discovered architecture through books at the public library. Theodore listened with complete attention, asking questions that showed he understood exactly what she was describing. "Your turn," Willow said. "Detroit?" Theodore's expression grew distant. "East Side. My dad left when I was 6. Mom did her best, but there was never enough money. I learned early that the world isn't kind to people without resources." He took a drink of wine. "I also learned that spaces matter. The architecture around us shapes how we see ourselves. Living in buildings that are falling apart, surrounded by ugliness and neglect, tells you that you don't matter, that you're not worth investing in. That's exactly why I designed Harmony Commons the way I did," Willow said, excited. "Beauty shouldn't be a luxury. Everyone deserves to live somewhere that makes them feel valued." "Exactly." Theodore leaned forward, and Willow became suddenly aware of how close they were across the small table. "That's what makes your project special. You're not just solving a housing problem, you're solving a dignity problem." Their eyes held, and something electric passed between them. Willow felt her pulse quicken, her skin warming. This was dangerous territory. Theodore Foster was her potential investor, a billionaire, completely out of her league in every way that mattered. But the way he was looking at her made her forget all the reasons this was a bad idea. The waiter arrived with their food, breaking the moment. They ate and talked about architecture, cities, design philosophy, favorite buildings. Theodore was passionate and thoughtful, and his occasional dry humor made Willow laugh in a way that felt almost unfamiliar. When had she last laughed like this? "I have a confession," Theodore said over dessert. "When I saw your presentation at the awards, my first thought wasn't about the architecture." "No." Willow's heart was doing strange things in her chest. "No, I thought you were the most captivating woman I'd ever seen. The passion, the conviction, the way you stood up there and challenged the entire industry to do better." His gaze was steady, intent. "Then you eviscerated me in the hallway, and I thought you might also be the most infuriating woman I'd ever met." Willow felt her cheeks heat. "I wasn't exactly fair to you. You were honest. I respected that, even if it stung." Theodore's hand rested on the table between them, close enough that Willow could feel its warmth. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about you for 3 weeks." "I haven't stopped thinking about you either," Willow admitted. "Though I told myself it was because I was angry at you. And now," she met his eyes, "now I think I was wrong about a lot of things." Theodore's fingers brushed against hers, the touch light but electric. "Have dinner with me tomorrow, not about the project, just us. Willow knew she should probably say no, keep things professional, but she didn't want to. Yes. His smile was worth every risk. They left the restaurant and walked through the village, talking easily now that the tension between them had shifted into something else. Theodore told her about his first major project, the mistakes he'd made, the lessons he'd learned. Willow shared her struggles as an independent architect, the rejection, the constant fight for credibility. "You're going to change the industry," Theodore said as they reached her hotel. "With or without my funding, but I hope you'll let me be part of it. I think I'd like that." They stood in the warm spring night, the city alive around them. Theodore reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, and Willow felt herself leaning into it. "Tomorrow," he said softly. "I'll pick you up at 7. Willow could only nod, her voice lost somewhere in the intensity of the moment. The next evening, Theodore arrived in a sleek black car that probably cost more than most houses, but he opened her door himself with old-fashioned courtesy. Willow had chosen a deep blue dress that hugged her curves and made her feel beautiful, and the way Theodore's eyes darkened when he saw her confirmed she'd chosen well. Dinner was at a rooftop restaurant with views of the Manhattan skyline. They talked for hours, the conversation flowing like they'd known each other for years instead of weeks. Theodore was brilliant and funny and surprisingly humble about his success. He asked about her dreams and listened like the answers mattered. "Why architecture?" he asked over coffee. "What made you choose this specific path?" Willow considered the question. "When I was 12, I found a book about Frank Lloyd Wright at a library sale. I'd never thought about buildings as something designed, you know. I thought they just existed. But Wright talked about organic architecture, spaces that enhance human life. I realized that architecture could be a form of care, of creating spaces where people could thrive." She looked at Theodore. "Why did you choose it?" "Similar reasons, I think. I wanted to build things that lasted." That mattered. His expression grew thoughtful, but somewhere along the way I got focused on building monuments instead of homes, on impressing people instead of serving them. You can do both, though. Your towers are incredible. They just serve a different need. Maybe. But after meeting you, I'm wondering if I've been thinking about it all wrong. What if the real innovation isn't in making taller buildings or using newer technology? What if it's in making good design accessible to everyone? The passion in his voice matched her own, and Willow felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't just attraction anymore. This was something deeper, more complicated, more real. After dinner, they walked through Central Park even though it was late, the paths lit by old-fashioned lamps. Theodore took her hand naturally, and Willow laced her fingers through his. "I should tell you something," Theodore said. "If we move forward with your project, I don't want there to be any confusion about my motives. The investment decision is based purely on the merits of Harmony Commons. What's happening between us is completely separate." "What is happening between us?" Willow asked, looking up at him. They'd stopped walking. Theodore turned to face her fully, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I don't know exactly, but I know I've never felt this way before. Like I've been waiting for you without knowing it." Willow's heart was racing. "I feel it too." Theodore kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. Willow melted into him, her hands finding their way to his shoulders, his arms wrapping around her waist. The kiss deepened, and Willow forgot they were in a public park, forgot everything except the feeling of his mouth on hers and the rightness of being in his arms. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Theodore rested his forehead against hers. "Stay in New York. Just for a few more days. Let me show you the city, spend more time with you." Willow knew she should get back to work, but she also knew she'd regret it forever if she walked away from this. "Okay." The next 3 days felt like a dream. Theodore took time off from work, something his assistant informed Willow he never did, and they explored the city together. They visited architectural landmarks, argued good-naturedly about design elements, ate street food from vendors, and talked about everything and nothing. Theodore was different than she'd expected. Yes, he was wealthy and successful, but he was also thoughtful and kind. He tipped generously but never condescendingly. He was recognized frequently but never made a show of it. When they passed homeless people, he stopped and talked to them like human beings, and Willow noticed he pressed cash into their hands when he thought she wasn't looking. They went to a construction site where Theodore's company was building a new office tower, and Willow got to see him in his element. He knew every worker's name, asked about their families, and addressed concerns with genuine care. This wasn't just a businessman maximizing profit. This was someone who understood that buildings were made by people and for people. On their 4th night together, they ended up at Theodore's penthouse apartment. Willow had been curious to see where he lived, and the space was stunning floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, clean modern lines, incredible art on the walls. But it also felt oddly impersonal, like a hotel room rather than a home. "You don't really live here, do you?" she asked, looking around. Theodore stood by the windows, hands in his pockets. "What do you mean? There's nothing of you here. No photos, no personal items, no signs that anyone actually inhabits this space." She walked over to him. "You built yourself this amazing life, but you haven't let yourself enjoy it." His jaw tightened. "I'm not good at the personal stuff." "Why not?" "Because letting yourself care about things means they can be taken away." The words came out rough, like they'd been pulled from somewhere deep. "I learned that early. Safer to keep moving, keep building, keep everything surface level." Willow reached for his hand. "That sounds lonely." "It was, until I met you." Theodore turned to face her fully. "Willow, I know this is fast. I know we barely know each other. But I've never felt this way about anyone. You challenge me. You inspire me. You make me want to be better than I am. You make me feel brave," Willow said. "Like I can actually achieve the things I've dreamed about." Theodore kissed her, and this time there was urgency in it. Willow responded in kind, her hands in his hair, his arms tight around her. They stumbled toward the bedroom, shedding clothes between kisses, and when Theodore laid her on the bed and looked at her with such raw want and tenderness mixed together, Willow felt completely seen for the first time in her life. They made love slowly, learning each other, and afterward Willow lay in Theodore's arms feeling like something fundamental had shifted in her universe. "Stay tonight," Theodore murmured against her hair. "Okay." She woke to find Theodore already awake, watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. "Good morning," she whispered. "Good morning." He kissed her softly. "I have a meeting I can't cancel this morning, but stay here. I'll be back by noon and we can spend the rest of the day together. I should probably head back to my hotel, get some work done. Or you could work from here. I have a home office you can use." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "I'm not ready to let you go yet," Willow smiled. "Then I'll stay." While Theodore was at his meeting, Willow did work from his office, making calls and refining her plans. But she also found herself thinking about the future. She lived in Philadelphia. Theodore lived in New York. Her entire project would require her to travel constantly once it got off the ground. How did that work with whatever this was between them? When Theodore returned, he found her on the phone, pacing his office. He waited until she finished, then pulled her into his arms. "How's the work going?" "Good. I talked to the manufacturing partners. They're excited about potential scaling." She looked up at him. "Theodore, we need to talk about logistics, how this works when I'm not in New York." "I've been thinking about that too." He guided her to the couch. "I have a proposal. Not for the project for us. I want to be part of Harmony Commons not just as an investor but as a partner. I have resources, connections, and honestly, I need a new challenge, something that matters. Willow's eyes widened. You want to work on my project with you, as equals. I'd maintain my company, but I want to focus more energy on this, on building things that make a real difference. His expression was earnest. And selfishly, it means we'd be working together, traveling together, building something together. What about your high-end projects? I have a great team who can handle those. This is what I want to do. Theodore took her hands. Look, I know it's fast. I know we're still figuring this out. But Willow, I'm falling in love with you. I want to be part of your life in every way you'll let me. Tears pricked Willow's eyes. I'm falling in love with you too. It terrifies me. Me too. He kissed her forehead. But let's be terrified together. They spent the next several months building Harmony Commons together, and it was harder and better than Willow had imagined. Theodore threw himself into the project with the same intensity he brought to everything, but he never tried to take over. He respected her vision, contributed his expertise, and used his connections to open doors that would have remained closed to her alone. They traveled to Philadelphia to break ground on the first 50 units. They worked with contractors, navigated zoning regulations, and dealt with 1,000 unexpected problems. Through it all, their relationship deepened. They learned each other's work styles, had their first real fight about structural versus aesthetic priorities, and made up thoroughly afterward. Theodore moved with surprising ease between his old life and this new path. He still managed his company, but he'd promoted trusted people into leadership roles and stepped back from the day-to-day operations. Willow watched him become more relaxed, more present, more genuinely happy than she suspected he'd been in years. They were in Philadelphia for the frame-raising ceremony when Theodore's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his expression shifted. I need to take this. He walked away, and Willow watched him pace as he talked, his body language growing increasingly tense. When he returned, his face was carefully neutral. That was the city of Detroit. They're planning a massive urban renewal project in the neighborhood where I grew up. They want Foster Architectural Group to submit a proposal. Theodore, that's amazing. They want luxury developments, high-end retail, the usual gentrification playbook. His voice was flat. Everything I've built my reputation on. Willow understood immediately. But that's not what the neighborhood needs. No, it needs what we're building here. Affordable housing, community spaces, opportunities for the people who actually live there. He looked at the skeletal frame of the Harmony Commons building. But if I pitch that, I might lose the contract. Or you might change their minds. Theodore was quiet for a long moment. Then a slow smile spread across his face. You know what? Let's find out. Will you come to Detroit with me? Help me design something that actually serves the community. Are you sure you want to do this? You could lose a major contract. I'm sure. Some things matter more than contracts. He pulled her close. You taught me that. They spent 3 weeks in Detroit, walking through the old neighborhood, talking to residents, understanding what people actually needed. Theodore was more open than Willow had ever seen him, vulnerable as he showed her the places that had shaped him. The apartment building where he'd lived, now abandoned. The library where he'd discovered architecture books. The corner store where his mom had worked nights. Together, they designed a proposal that was radical in its simplicity. Affordable housing integrated with small business incubators, community centers, green spaces, and infrastructure improvements. They used Theodore's high-end design sensibilities, but applied them to buildings that served regular people. It was beautiful and practical and exactly what the neighborhood needed. The day of the presentation, Theodore was more nervous than Willow had ever seen him. They stood in the city council chambers, their proposal loaded and ready. Theodore looked at her and she squeezed his hand. "You've got this," she whispered. He did. Theodore presented their vision with passion and precision, explaining not just what they wanted to build but why it mattered. He talked about growing up in that neighborhood, about understanding firsthand what it meant to live in a place that had been forgotten, about the responsibility they had to do better. The council members asked hard questions. Theodore answered honestly. When they expressed concern about the economics, Willow stepped in with the data from their Philadelphia project, showing how affordable housing could be financially sustainable. When they finished, the room was silent. Then the council chairwoman spoke. "Mr. Foster, this is not what we expected from you, but it's exactly what this neighborhood needs. You have our full support." Outside the chambers, Theodore swept Willow into his arms, spinning her around. "We did it, you did it," she corrected. "You stood up for what mattered. We're a team." He set her down but kept his arms around her. In work and in life, the Detroit project became the crown jewel of their partnership. Over the next year, they split their time between Philadelphia, Detroit, and New York, building communities rather than just buildings. Theodore formally restructured his company to focus primarily on affordable and mixed-income housing, using profits from his existing high-end projects to fund the social impact work. Other cities took notice. Awards followed, but not the kind that Theodore had won before. These were recognition from community organizations, from the families who moved into their buildings, from people who finally had homes they could afford and be proud of. Willow moved into Theodore's penthouse, and together they transformed it into an actual home. Photos on the walls, books stacked on tables, her design sketches mixed with his architectural drawings. It became a space that reflected both of them. One evening, nearly 2 years after they'd met at that awards ceremony, Theodore took Willow to the rooftop garden of their first completed Harmony Commons building in Philadelphia. Families were gathered for a community barbecue, kids playing on the grass, neighbors talking and laughing. "This is what I dreamed about," Willow said, watching a little girl chase bubbles across the lawn. "People having homes that give them space to live fully." "You made it real," Theodore said. "You changed my entire life, Willow. Before you, I was building monuments to my own success. Now I'm building things that matter. We're building them together." Theodore took her hand, drawing her attention back to him. "About that, I have a question." He pulled a small box from his pocket and Willow's breath caught. "I know I'm supposed to get down on one knee, but I want you to see everyone here first. All these people who have homes because you refused to give up on your vision, because you challenged me to be better." Tears were already streaming down Willow's face. "I love you, Willow Davies. I love your passion and your conviction, and the way you see the world not as it is, but as it should be. I love that you make me want to build a better future every single day." He opened the box to reveal a stunning ring with a central diamond surrounded by smaller stones in shades of green and blue. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," Willow said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, of course, yes." Theodore slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her as applause erupted around them. The families they'd built homes for cheered, and Willow felt overwhelmed by the beautiful completeness of the moment. They were married 6 months later in a ceremony that perfectly reflected them both. The venue was the community center in Detroit that had been part of Theodore's urban renewal project, decorated simply but beautifully. Both their families were there: Theodore's mother, who cried through the entire ceremony, and Willow's father, who told Theodore he'd better take good care of his daughter. Friends from the architecture world mixed with residents from their housing projects, with construction workers who'd built their buildings, with everyone who'd been part of their journey. When Theodore's mother hugged Willow after the ceremony, she whispered, "Thank you for reminding my son where he came from and helping him build something meaningful." "He did that himself," Willow said. "I just gave him a reason to try." Their honeymoon was spent touring sustainable housing projects across Europe, because neither of them could fully turn off the work part of their brains. But it was also romantic and perfect, just the two of them exploring new cities and dreaming about future projects. 3 years into their marriage, Willow found herself standing in the bathroom of their home, looking at a pregnancy test with shaking hands. Positive. She and Theodore had talked about children, but they'd both been so focused on their work that they hadn't actively been trying. This was a surprise, but as the reality sank in, Willow felt joy bloom in her chest. She told Theodore that night over dinner, simply sliding the test across the table. He stared at it for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up at her with tears in his eyes. "We're having a baby, we're having a baby." Theodore came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "I can't believe it. We're going to be parents. Are you happy?" Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He pulled back to look at her. "Our kid is going to grow up knowing that home isn't just a place, it's a right, and we're going to make sure other kids know that too." Their daughter, Grace, was born on a snowy December morning, and she was perfect. Tiny and pink with Theodore's dark hair and Willow's green eyes. Theodore held her with a gentleness that made Willow fall in love with him all over again, watching this strong, successful man completely undone by the tiny human in his arms. "Hi, Grace," he whispered. "I'm your dad. I'm going to build you a world worth living in." And he did. They both did. They expanded their work to 12 cities, creating thousands of affordable housing units. They trained other architects in their methods, sharing rather than hoarding their success. They established a foundation that provided grants to emerging architects working on social impact projects. Grace grew up on construction sites, playing with hard hats and learning the difference between load-bearing and decorative walls before she could read. She was 3 when she confidently told another child at the playground that her parents built houses for people who needed them, and Willow felt her heart swell with pride. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Theodore surprised Willow with a gift, the deed to a house in Philadelphia, not far from where she'd grown up. "It needs renovation," he said as they stood in front of the old Victorian, "but I thought we could do it together, make it ours. Give Grace a neighborhood to grow up in, not just a tower in the sky." Willow looked at the house, at Theodore, at their daughter playing in the weedy front yard. "It's perfect." They renovated the house over the next year, doing much of the work themselves when they could. Theodore taught Willow carpentry. She taught him painting techniques. Grace helped by providing enthusiastic but chaotic assistance. The house became a reflection of their family, beautiful but practical, designed for living rather than impressing. 10 years after that first awards ceremony, Willow stood on a stage accepting the Lifetime Achievement Award in Sustainable Architecture. Theodore sat in the front row, Grace beside him, both beaming with pride. In her speech, Willow talked about how architecture was an act of love, about building spaces that honored human dignity, about the responsibility they all had to do better. "I used to think I'd change the world alone," she concluded. "But I learned that the most meaningful work happens in partnership. My husband, Theodore Foster, taught me that we're stronger together than we ever could be apart, that love and ambition don't have to be separate paths. They can be the same journey." The audience stood, applauding, and Willow looked at Theodore. He mouthed, "I love you," and she felt the truth of it down to her bones. That night, back in their Victorian house with its creaky floors and well-loved spaces, Willow and Theodore sat on the porch swing while Grace slept upstairs. The neighborhood around them hummed with life. Families in homes they could afford, children playing safely, people building lives of dignity and hope. "Do you ever think about that awards ceremony?" Willow asked, nestled against Theodore's side. "How much we disliked each other." Theodore laughed, the sound warm in the darkness. "I didn't dislike you. I was threatened by you. You represented everything I'd been avoiding. And now you're my favorite person in the world, my partner in everything that matters." He kissed the top of her head. "Competing against you for that award was the best thing that ever happened to me." Willow smiled, thinking about the journey that had brought them here. From rivals to partners to lovers to parents, from individual ambitions to shared dreams. From buildings designed to impress to homes built with love. "I wouldn't change a single thing," she said softly. "Neither would I." They sat together as the stars came out, planning their next project, dreaming their next dream, living the life they'd built together, one choice, one building, one moment of courage at a time. The future stretched before them, full of possibility and purpose, and they would face it the way they faced everything now, together.